And I'm super excited about the next panel that we have coming up, which is MetaTr versal, the interoperability movement. And we'll explore the importance of working together to create a seamless ecosystem. So to lead the discussion, I'm thrilled to introduce the moderator, Ben Erwin, creator of Colley's Immersive Awards, board member of Metaverse Standard Forum, and president of the Academy Immersive Arts and Science. Please help me welcome the panel to the stage.
Hi, Beth. Hey, it's good to see you.
Hi, Ed.
Hello. Hi, everyone. First of all, I want to thank the Infinity Festival organizers, Mark Lieber, Adam Newman, and the massive crew and everything that they put together. And I also am very honored that we're following Vicki Beck and that incredible presentation. And they say always start with the why. The why of Immersive was very well laid out in this last panel. And the why that we're here to talk about is why standards and interoperability in immersive production. So I'm very pleased to introduce the panel here. We have Elena Piech of ZeroSpace and Experiential Technologies. Elena?
Hey, so I came in from New York, came in yesterday morning, and I'm at ZeroSpace. We're a studio that does virtual production, motion capture, 3D scanning. And then I'm also producing right now with a new company called Experiential Technologies, which focuses on AR, VR prototyping. So definitely a lot of the ideas that he was just saying in her keynote really apply to how we think and build immersive experiences.
Thanks. And Daisy Leak, Vice President of Magnops and also a board member of the Academy of Immersive Arts and Sciences.
Hi, yeah, so Daisy Leak. A lot of what we do at Magnops is what we like to call applied R&D. We work in the mixed reality, virtual production space, anything that's bridging the digital and the physical together. So yeah, that's us, and we're based out of LA and also have a studio in the UK.
And Neil Trevett, the Vice President of Developer Ecosystems at NVIDIA, the President of the Kronos Group, and the Chair and Founder of Metaverse Standards Forum.
Okay, that's it. Thanks. My day job's at NVIDIA. Good to see everyone here. They let me spend a lot of time on standards. So I've been the chair of the Kronos Group for a long time. We're a standards organization that does low-level hardware access standards. You may know us for standards such as Vulkan OpenGL, GLTF, OpenXR. Hopefully standards are useful to the crowd that are here. And working with Ben, we recently set up the Metaverse Standards Forum, trying to take cooperation to the next level.
Okay, well, as I said, we're here to talk about the why of standards and interoperability. And on my way over here this morning, I had yet another thought as I was walking along the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and I'm seeing in these stars, there's a TV set, there's a microphone for radio, there is a mask representing theater, a television set, and I thought it's only a matter of time before we start seeing VR headsets as a symbol that is in there. And it's representative that we are a very nascent industry still, where immersive is the natural evolution of film, TV, and all the media that has come before it. And so what we've seen in the last 40 years is the emergence of 3D graphics. And right now in production, it is being implemented, but what we are seeing is hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on VFX. And what are they being spent on? They're being spent on creating 3D environments. And what we're not seeing is this art form and this massive investment that's being made in entertaining people and educating people being repurposed and remonetized as experiences that we can be inside of and share together. Well, what is that going to take? It's going to take standards and interoperability to make that possible. And so Daisy and Elena are in the real world doing immersive production, and they have some war stories and some case studies of people who are doing it right to share with you. And Neil, who is very deeply involved in standards, and we have Neil to thank for much of the evolution of graphics APIs over the last year. Neil was presented with the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Polys this year, and I personally gained an appreciation for all that you've done to be able to make 3D as we know it possible. And so, Neil, if you could start us off with especially GLTF and USD, OpenUSD, and how that is becoming an emerging standard that is important to this community.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. So perhaps start now, what is a standard? Right? A standard is essentially a contract, an agreement between two parties, might be hardware vendors and software vendors, it might be a client and a server device, it might be just two communities. How do you communicate? And if you can agree on communication, then you get a number of advantages. The most obvious one is what we call interoperability standards. Things just work, and they work together. The most obvious advantages like portability, removal of pain points, friction points as you're trying to construct the tool chains that you need. You're trying to get your images rendered on your hardware. It just works because you're using a standard API. That's the really the kind of well understood, I think, value of standards. But really the bigger picture is that by leveraging standards, by using them, by reaching out of your silo, you can do much more because you can do things that you don't have to invent everything yourself. You can reach out into other vendors, other communities, other technologies, and leverage them so you can achieve more and better yourself. So it's really, standards are really fundamental to building industries and communities like this. So you mentioned USD and GLTF, to get to that briefly. One thing that often gets confused is what's the difference between an open standard and an open source? Often they're conflated, that people think they're the same thing, but actually they're very different. They're both awesome, and you need both. But an open source project is where you have multiple companies coming and implementing a single implementation of whatever it is. And that's a great thing. You can share the load of implementing something that's adding value, quite complicated. You don't have to do it for yourself. But it's just one implementation. An open standard is different. It's a specification on how something is going to work. That means you could have multiple people, multiple companies implementing that technology and shipping it in different products, in different price points, in different geographies, in different use cases, different platforms, and enables a technology to be much more widely disseminated, become truly pervasive in the industry, so folks like yourselves can use it wherever you need to. And USD is a great example, actually, of transitioning from one to the other. USD was originally a big open source project, completely awesome, creating movies. But now that technology has matured that it needs to be used in many different places, not just movies, but many other different markets. So the new standards organization, the Alliance OpenUSD, has been formed, and they are creating specifications to access the key elements of the USD ecosystem through open API standards. And they just started. They have a lot of work to do, but they're doing a great job. And there are many different standards organizations. There are AUSD, Kronos, W3C, bringing it all into the web. There's ASWF. There's many, many different standards orgs out there.
Thank you. Daisy, one of the things that really caught my attention when we were prepping for this panel is the work that Magnops is doing. And I was here last year, and one of the things that I was kind of taken aback by was that we weren't farther along in adoption of Immersive, and I'm really happy to see that Immersive is really pushing forward this year. And one of the studios that's really been doing a lot of the good work, Ben Grossman, the CEO of Magnops, as well as Daisy, both appeared on panels last year, and both really impressed me with their forward-thinking attitude towards Immersive. And so your work in open sourcing and the platforms that you're working on, I think, are really of particular interest to this audience. Would you take us into that?
Yeah, of course. And maybe just for a little bit of context for folks who don't know our organization. Again, I mentioned this in shorthand that we're basically applied R&D. Really what we're looking towards is how are we bridging physical and digital realities? Because again, you live in a world now where people are looking at their phones or they're watching something on a screen, but more to the point, like those things are blending together every day. And we work a lot with different partners and different creatives and directors who have a vision of what they want, and really we're kind of problem solvers to help them get to that place. And so, of course, some of the war stories we have on a daily basis is like, okay, cool. We're building this thing on Unreal. Now we're building it for a film. And then all of a sudden we see all these different opportunities, like you had mentioned, Ben, like you're building these beautiful immersive worlds and how can I use it and leverage it in different ways? And we want to be able to do that for our partners. We're like, hey, if you thought about this, like going multiple platforms at any given time, and that wasn't like a friction point, like what story could you tell? What kind of interactive or immersive experience would you have? And so we're always trying to think about how do we make that easier or less friction to our creative partners, but also for our teams, because my background is predominantly in production. I worked many years at Disney, which was awesome as a producer, and cut my teeth there, which was great. And then worked here similarly as an APM and things. And so my brain always goes to like, how do we take a timeline that's 9 months, take it to 6, take it to 4, and reuse or kind of repurpose things. And so we ended up working alongside our technical team, one of which is here today, Kevin Mulliken, who is our VP of Tech, building a software layer that we call CSP that we have open source because we would love open standards. And so on our way to that, we're trying to figure out like how can you have assets that you build in Unreal or in Unity or in web or in VR, and how do you have those seamlessly translate between each other while we have these separate ecosystems? So that then if I'm talking to a creative partner, we don't have the constraint of saying, well, okay, well, we built that in Unreal, so now, I don't know what we're going to do to get it to web. It's like, well, actually, let's convert it over using this software. You can actually see it now in fairly short time. So that's a lot of what we focus on, is really getting rid of technical barriers so that the creative partners that we work with don't have those things to think about, and they can continue to push storytelling. They can continue to think about what is the thing I haven't told yet, and how can we enable that? And that's really kind of what we think about.
Well, one of the things that you hear a lot is meet people where they are, and what you're saying about being able to make experiences that are built in different creator tools work with each other in those formats. But there's also the distribution and the accessibility of things, and accessibility not in the sense of helping the differently abled consume content, which is very important, but just having people having access. And right now we're living in a world where there are billions of 2D screens and maybe just over 10 million something headsets that people are now able to get and fully experience stereoscopic and 6DoF content. And what I believe we're moving towards is a immersive first philosophy, so that when the web evolved into mobile, this concept of responsive and mobile first came out of that. But we're moving into an immersive first thing. So Elena, could you tell us a little bit about some of your war stories? And we were talking about transmedia and how important that is to be able to take these assets and make them portable, not just from tool to tool, but from device to device.
Yeah, and I think Neil did a really good job to give context. Daisy showing how it's being used in production, and now I'll bring you the bad stories. But I think for us, so at ZeroSpace, we're studio based in New York. We do a lot with media and entertainment, but then also since we're in New York, we do a lot with marketing and branding. And I think since it is such a new space, even just taking a second to do the hand-holding and do the explanation. Like for us, for example, when we're saying GLTF, interoperability, OBJ, for us, this is all words that make sense. But even for me, my partner still, who was an AI data consultant, doesn't understand what I do. And we forget how second nature some of these terms are. So one example of a recent project in talking about standards is we are working with a brand that's under the L'Oreal umbrella, and the brand is opening a new store. But the new store won't come out until a couple years from now. So they wanted us to take a digital twin of the architecture CAD file and bring it into the Apple Vision Pro, so that way they could show the CEO what the new store is going to look like. When we originally set the scope, we said, hey, we looked at the CAD asset that you had, but there was no textures or materials on that. And that was written in the contract, give us the textures and materials. And they said, great, we'll do that. And then it comes to the date where they're supposed to give us the asset. And we look at it again and we say, hey, there's no textures and materials. And the client goes, well, we gave you the asset. And then we show them what it looks like. And you just see a completely gray 3D asset. And immediately that's
like a wax figure.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, you meant that it needs all the colors on an asset. And so I think doing that hand-holding and doing the explanation, and even same thing for this Apple Vision Pro project that we're doing, talking about standards. We got the CAD file that the architect firm was working on for building that real physical store. And then we had to go through and do a lot of work to optimize the asset, to reduce the polygon count, to make it performant in the Vision Pro. And I'd love to have a future where, hey, here's your asset, here's the different layers and ways in which it could be used, here's the AR distribution mode, VR playback, 3D gaming experience, etc. And I think right now, brands aren't quite thinking of that. Another story that comes to mind is we work with the innovation team for a luxury jewelry department. And 2 years ago, the innovation team hired a gaming company to make a pixel streaming experience. And so pixel streaming is you take a 3D game and you stream it on the web. So you don't need to have a high-end gaming device to play it. They built this entire game, and then once it came time to deployment, they realized pixel streaming was too expensive. So they killed the project, and then a year and a half later, they came to us and said, hey, we have this game. How can we repurpose it? And so we saw the screen recordings of the game, and then we said, okay, do you have the files for us to use? No, and we canceled the contract. We lost the assets. And so we just used that to kind of get some inspiration, and then had to start from scratch.
And in that, we have...
Sorry.
No, we have the whole idea of interoperability, because when you're talking about 3D file formats that require textures and materials to be shipped with it, GLTF is one of the formats that's the most interoperable, and it actually bakes in the lighting, it bakes in various extensions, and it bakes in the colors and materials, and which is why it is sort of the de facto 3D model format that WebXR uses and so forth. But the thing is the players themselves may not represent them the same way. And so there's not just interoperability of the file formats, but of the viewers and the players. And so this colorful background that we have here is representing the puzzle of the pieces coming together. So Neil, could you pick up on the idea of how interoperability between players and formats will make assets durable for the future, so that the example that Helena just gave, where you can't open up the files. Do you have those source files, and the durability of not just the exported files, but the source files?
Yeah, I mean, that's another big, but that's exactly as you say, of having these defined formats. It's actually very interesting. I mean, I love your war stories, but both of you, it's oh my God. We just need more interoperability. At the mixed reality or XR, and I'm going to use the M word, I don't know anyone else using it, the Metaverse. Really, the word metaverse. It's driving the need for interoperability. It's really interesting when the metaverse hype cycle started. At the Kronos group, we were a standards organization. People just ignore us, right? We're in the corner doing our thing, but people were knocking on the virtual front door, going, "You do interoperability. We need you guys because we're trying to build the metaverse." It suddenly opened up the kind of the zeitgeist to the value and the need for interoperability. And I think the kind of stories that you're telling just reinforce that. Going to mixed reality as a media type is you're going to need to gather input files from many more types and diverse sources, CAD files, scans, or whatever, and you're having to deploy onto a bigger diversity of devices too. And they potentially need different types of file formats to meet their own capabilities. So the need for interoperability is becoming combinatorial. It's getting much more urgent that we do the interoperability thing efficiently. So the key to a good standard is not the specification, it's the testing. Because anything you don't test doesn't work. You can guarantee it. The Vulkan API, which is the latest move from modern, has three unit. It has three. Sorry, sure. I'll shout.
Yeah.
So Vulkan has 3 million tests. So every GPU you buy is gone through this fast test suite, and there are still bugs. It's not exhaustive enough. GLTF2, we're putting a lot of investment into how do you test with creating test assets, testing all the different tricky corners to make sure all the engines are displaying all correctly. We're moving on to the next level where we're trying to persuade and educate everyone how to display the right colors. So the color matching. And once we have a standard that is well proven, we actually a bit wonky, but we take it to the International Standards Organization, ISO. So even if Chronos backbreaks in another 20 years, the standard will still be there and well be fine. So testing, pair and design, and making sure that standards are not reliant on any one organization, people nonsense created at all part of this longevity. And that's testing the really.
Absolutely. That's really what it is going to take, is the testing to make sure that things represent properly on different devices and for the long term. And that's something that is created today will still be many years from now still around. And NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang, several years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, promised us holodecks by 2040. And that seemed like an ambitious statement then, and we're only 15 years away from that. But on Saturday, we're going to be seeing the Star Trek motion picture repurposed or redone director's cut for today's cinematic standards. And just to think about a 45-year-old movie being able to take the original source files, being able to update it to a modern spec, and then present it with maximum wow factor for today's projection technology and sound systems is amazing to think that of a holodeck that we would have in not 15 years, but in 45 years. But Neil, you had in your opening talked about the difference between open source and open standards. And Daisy, one of the things that Magnops has been working on is an actual open source project that people can use. And can you talk about what you've developed and the philosophical reason? It comes down to, do you want to grow the pie or do you want to own the pie? We're living in an ecosystem where there's a lot of R&D money spent. It's very understandable that big corporations that would spend money to develop spec wants to own it, and they want that to become a standard. And a lot of the things that we take for granted, like the MP4 standard, are actually licensed, royalty developed things. So it's not like you can't make money, but the ability to grow the ecosystem through open source. Talk about that philosophy.
Of course. Oh, and the mic's back on. Tell it with a chance. Okay. Yeah, of course. I think there's one thing that Neil says that I'm really kind of clinging to. I know that you've also looked through this, is that it's through trying, right? And so I would love to say that like Kevin and us at Magnops thought about doing an open source platform. I'm gonna be real with you. Like that was like the last thought we had. We were in the middle of building like several dozens of things at a time. And we were like, pardon my French, like shit. We have all these tools and all these things that are helping us make all of our projects as interoperable as possible. Maybe we need to put all those things together. And I think what kind of spawned us to think about that is back in 2018, we started a fairly large project with the World Expo in Dubai. And we were bringing together people who were building CAD models for buildings that didn't exist yet. And really our mandate with them was to, start to envision and imagine what this World Expo was going to be. We wanted to put augmented reality around the site. We wanted to be able to do installations and fit outs inside of major pavilions. And so you have to get all these different kinds of file formats together to be able to create something that is unified. And Kevin and I lost many hours of sleep and got a lot of gray hair on that project. But what we ended up with was, wow, if we can take and build a software layer that can consume all these different media types and then translate them in an easy way to these different platforms, then that honestly allows other people to do the same. I think it's what more of our time on that project and also future projects showing other partners we work with, like, hey, you can use this too. We open sourced it. Like, if you want to be able to make a really cool like web AR app, but you built it in Unreal, like use this, and it will allow you to translate those assets over and be able to format them correctly. And that was really kind of the brainchild of one very specific experience we had on the expo, which was we were visualizing the mobility pavilion, which is one of their signature pavilions, and they basically handed over a CAD model to us, which is a big old gray model. And they were like, well, we want you to kind of imagine what the fit out of this would be. We were working with like Met Studios in London. We were working with Foster's and Partners. So of course our nomenclature was, well, let's put it in VR. Let's just feel what it feels like to be in this building, and let's put textures and colors and everything all over it and actually walk through it. And of course, the architects were like, "Whoa, we have software for that. We have things for that," which was great. Everybody does in their individual vertical and their industry. But what was really fascinating is we put them in this VR headset. Our CEO Ben was kind of like doing a narrative over the top of it to walk people through, and there was two big findings they had when they did that, which was there's this beautiful cylinder elevator that went up through the middle of this building that was told that it was going to hold 150 people. And when we got in VR, we're like, oh, we don't want to put 150 people in this. Like, it's going to feel like claustrophobic as fuck. So, like, we're like, there's no way. But we're like, let's just let them go through it. So they went in, they felt virtual people up next to them, and they're like, wow, this really doesn't feel as good as it did like when we were looking at it in our software. And then more importantly, they got to the top of the elevator, and then the elevator doors open, and they walked into the experience. They realized that when they opened up this big door of this elevator, they walked straight into a bathroom. Like, it just, again, it makes sense mechanically, but like from an experience standpoint, a creative standpoint, just it's not good for the user. And so I remember that they were sitting in this big conference room with tons of people from the expo, from Foster Partners, et cetera, and the CEO of that architecture firm Stubby goes, we're changing this elevator, we're just going to turn it. And everybody just like, what? This giant $1 million elevator is going to turn it? Like, yeah, because it's a crap experience. And at that moment, Kevin and I and Ben were all like, you know what? This is what interoperability is about. You can give people in various industries the ability to talk and see what their world is together. You can make better decisions. Bluntly, you can make cooler creative decisions. And so for us, that's kind of what drives us and why we end up saying, you know, let's open source this and make the pie bigger and let other people be able to create and be able to benefit from what all of these industries have done very well, but together.
And I really admire that approach because it provides opportunity, and that's really what we need to grow the entire industry. And one of the things that a spec I often cite is that there are 12 million, 13 million JavaScript developers out there, but there's probably 5 figures of JavaScript developers that are working in 3D. But as this medium is growing and people start realizing, hey, I need to do that, then these numbers are going to increase. And by having open source projects that lower the barrier to entry for people, they'll be able to embrace the technology and become part of the industry and bring their creative genius to the future of content. And so I want to pick up on where Vicky Beck left off in terms of it's not for the faint of heart. You know, there's some risk-taking going on around here in terms of all of this because none of this has been invented yet. You know, we're applied R&D is what you're doing, and you're working in R&D, Chronos, and certainly developing these 3D graphics is really hardcore R&D. And so from ZeroSpace, you know, you had a lot of clients come in, advertising clients, studio clients, wanting something new.
Yeah, and even I know I gave 2 war stories, but I could give one good example. So our stage in New York is used a lot for car process. So hey, it's a LED wall like that. You put the footage of the car driving all along the road, and then instead of having your talent go to that location, they can just do it all virtually and get the same shot again and again, etc. And so we were working on a show with a superhero who wears black and has a butler. And for the car process scenes that were shot by day, they went in the streets of New York and they got those plates. But for the car process shots that were shot at night, one of the things they did is this superhero has a video game franchise. And so they actually took a car and had a car drive in the video game, screen recorded that,
upresed it, and then sent it to us, and we used it on the wall. And so that was just a really awesome use case to think, okay, hey, how can you get these platforms that seem separate to really start working and communicating together?
How are we doing for time?
We have 40 seconds.
40 seconds. Closing remarks.
Okay. Yeah, no pressure. So hopefully we've shown you why interoperability is important to you and can be enabling for what you want to do. Interoperability doesn't happen by itself. It's people work on standards, so human too. They need help and they need input. And it's surprisingly hard for standards organizations to get real input from people using the standards. The problems is what we want to hear about. If you're having problems, if a standard doesn't have the capabilities that you're looking for, please, reach out to your local standards organization and let them know your input is like gold to any standards organization. If you can't have the time to go around a dozen different ones, go to the Metaverse Standards Forum, because that's where they're all gathering in one place.
Easy.
I think from us, at the end of the day, the more that we focus on this, the more we can take down those technical barriers and tell better stories, cooler stories, more immersive stories. So to me, like, we should all continue to make war stories and not be scared of them. So the more war stories we have, the closer we keep getting to that infinite.
That piece.
I think education is the big part. So both getting your team to care about why and how you should manage and organize assets, and then talking with clients and partners about how you can use this and how you don't create a project, if the project gets killed, you throw away the assets. Keep them, see how they can be reused.
Well, that brings us to the end, and my final remark on this is the investment that's being made in this technology, in the content that's being created. I think that all of the creators out there and all of the money that's being spent on this can learn a lesson from the graveyard of failed proprietary projects that there are so many of them on the web. So by you as a community, the immersive production community, embracing standards and putting out content that is interoperable with people, you're going to reach more people, you're going to give a greater ROI to the investment that's being made, and your content will live forever. So with that, I thank you all. Thank you to the panel, Neil, Daisy, Elena.
That was amazing. So cool.